Adelaide Merrick did not weep at the graveside. She had a clerk waiting at the lych-gate. He wore a black coat and he held a folded paper, and the paper was edged in the lender's own black ruling. He put it into my hand before the earth was filled. My husband's coffin was still bright at the bottom of the pit, and a boy of 19 handed me a demand for money over the open grave. That was the beginning. Grief, they told me, is not legal tender. Josiah Fenn said those very words at the wake, in my own drawing room before 11 mourners, beneath the sword my husband carried at the Alma. That night I opened Edmund's buff paybook to the back pages. The army had never squared its account with him. I did not yet know how much they owed. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, let me ask one small thing. If a story of a widow, a manor and a debt paid late is the sort of thing you came for, subscribe and stay with me to the end. And leave a comment telling me the town you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, from Ludcott to wherever your window looks out tonight. Now let me tell it properly, from the start, the way it happened. My name is Adelaide Merrick. I am an old woman as I say this, and I am at peace, and that is a thing worth telling you at the outset. Because a story like mine, told wrong, sounds like bitterness. It is not bitterness. It is only the record, set down plainly, of what was taken and how it came back. Hartsmere Manor sits above the village of Ludcott, in Shropshire, where the land folds down toward the water meadows and the river runs slow and brown past the willows. It had been the Merrick's house for 30 years. My husband's father bought it. My husband was born in the west bedroom. We were married in the little church at the foot of the hill, and we buried him from that same church, and between those 2 Sundays lay the whole of my married life. Edmund was a soldier. Colonel Edmund Merrick, of the 41st Shropshire Fusiliers. He was not a rich man's idea of a soldier. He did not care for the glitter of it. He cared for his men. That, in the end, was the whole trouble, and the whole of the glory too. You must understand one thing before you can understand any of it. In the winter before the regiment sailed for the Crimea, the army was slow. It was always slow. There were men in Edmund's companies without proper boots. There were men in greatcoats gone thin as paper who would be asked to stand in a Russian January. The stores did not come. The money did not come. The clerks in London wrote letters, and the letters said wait. Edmund did not wait. He went to Ludcott, and he went to a mortgage company, the Averill Mortgage Annuity Company, and he raised money on the water-meadow acres. The meadows are the best of the land. He put them up, and he took the money, and he spent it on boots and blankets and powder and salt meat for men who were not his sons, but whom he loved as if they were. He equipped a regiment the Crown was too slow to equip. That is the debt this whole story is built upon. I want you to hold it in your mind, because a great deal turns on whether you see it as I saw it. It was an honourable debt. It was born of duty. My husband mortgaged the finest field we owned so that other women's sons would not freeze. He did it quietly. He told me only after it was done, and he told me as a man tells his wife of a small thing over the fire with his boots off. I have borrowed against the meadows, Addy, he said. The men needed kit. The army will square it in time. They always square it, only they take an age about it. They always square it, only they take an age about it. Remember that line. He said it as a jest. It was not a jest. It was the truth that would save us, and he did not live to know it. He came home from the war thinner and greyer and quieter. He did not talk of it. Sometimes at night I would wake and find him at the window, looking at nothing, and I would say nothing either. And after a while he would come back to bed. The war was in him like a cold he could not shake. He lived 3 years after Inkerman. Then one grey morning in the spring of 1857, his heart stopped while he was pulling on his boots to walk the grounds, and he was gone, and I was a widow at 48, with a mortgaged manor and a name I meant to keep clean. The funeral was on a Thursday. The whole village came. They loved him, you see. Old men who had served under his father stood bareheaded in the drizzle. Sergeant Cobb stood at the graveside with his empty sleeve pinned across his chest, straight as a fence post, and did not move the whole while. Cobb had left his arm at Inkerman. Edmund had carried him 1/2 mile through the snow to the surgeon's. Cobb never spoke of it. He did not have to. He was our groundsman now, and he would have walked into fire for me because of a debt of blood that no ledger in England could measure. And it was there, at the lych-gate, with the clay still wet on the spades, that the boy in the black coat stepped forward. He was Fenn's clerk. I did not know his name, and I never troubled to learn it. He was perhaps 19, and his collar was too big for his neck, and he was frightened, I think, of what he had been sent to do. But he did it. He held out the paper. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, "from the Averill Company. You are to have it in hand this day," I was told. I looked at the paper. I did not take it at once. Behind me the sexton was still working. I could hear the earth going down. And this child in his borrowed coat stood there with his arm out, waiting for a widow to accept a bill across her husband's grave. Sergeant Cobb made a low sound in his throat. I felt him move at my shoulder, and I put my hand back, just an inch, to still him. Then I took the paper. I did not open it. I did not weep. I folded it once more, small, and I put it into the pocket of my morning dress. And I turned and walked back up the hill to my own house. The clerk did not follow. I think he was glad to be quit of me. I did not read it until the mourners were in the drawing-room and I could stand behind them unwatched. It was a demand. £3,850 in arrears of interest, called in early, payable at once. Called in early. The words were plain and cold. There had never been a difficulty about the interest. Edmund had paid it to the day, every quarter, for years. There was no cause to call it in. Except that a man had died, and a company had smelled blood in the water, and someone had decided that a widow alone would be easier to break than a colonel alive. I stood at the edge of my own drawing-room, among the black coats and the low voices and the smell of the funeral meats, and I read that figure, and I understood for the first time what I was up against. Not a mistake, not a hardship, a design. And then Josiah Fenn spoke. I had not marked him come in. He was a smooth man, Fenn, well-fed, with a watch chain across a comfortable belly and a way of holding his hat that made you feel he was doing you a favour by standing in your house. He was the agent of the Averill Company for the whole of the West County. He had ridden out, he said, to pay his respects. His respects. He stood beneath my husband's sword. The sword that had been at the Alma and the Redan, and he turned to a knot of the mourners as if he were addressing a meeting, and he said the thing I will carry to my own grave. I'll not dress it up, said Fenn. The company has been more than patient. A death is a sad thing, but a death alters nothing on the ledger. Grief is not legal tender, ladies and gentlemen. The sum is owed. The sum must be found. Grief is not legal tender. He said it in my drawing-room. He said it before 11 people who had loved my husband. There was a silence after it of the kind that comes when decent people are too shocked to speak. The vicar's wife went white. Old Mr. Harkness turned his face away, and Sergeant Cobb, by the door, took one step forward with his one hand closing into a fist. And I said, "Quite quietly, Sergeant, only that." He stopped. I did not answer Fenn. I want you to understand that, because it matters to everything that came after. I did not rage. I did not plead. I did not give him the satisfaction of a single word. I inclined my head, as a hostess does to a guest who is leaving, and I let him feel that he had said his piece into empty air. He put on his hat, at last, and he went. The wheels of his gig went down the drive, and the mourners breathed again, and someone began, too brightly, to speak of the weather. But I had heard him. I had heard every word, and a thing had happened inside me that I did not have a name for yet. It was not grief. Grief I already knew. This was harder and quieter, and it did not weep. It counted. That night I could not sleep. When the house was dark and the last of the black coats gone home, I lit a candle and I went to Edmund's study, where the household ledgers were kept, and I sat down to do the thing I always did when the world tilted. I balanced the books. It was my work, the ledgers. It had always been my work. Edmund handled the men and the guns and the horses. I handled the money. In 30 years I had never let a farthing go unaccounted, and I was not about to begin because a man in a watch chain had frightened a room. I opened the household book. I found the entries for the mortgage, quarter by quarter, in my own hand, paid and paid and paid. There was no error there. The debt was real. £3,850 was a great sum, more than I could raise without selling the very land it was secured against, and to sell in haste, in a burial month, with a hungry buyer waiting, was to give the meadows away for a song. I saw the trap of it clearly. They did not want their money back. They wanted the land. Fenn wanted the land. The whole design was to force a sale I could not stop, and to be there, smiling, when it fell. I closed the household book. And then, because I could not sleep, and because his desk was open, and because a widow's hands go to a dead man's things in the small hours, I opened the drawer where Edmund kept his soldiers' papers. There was his commission, on its stiff parchment. There were his campaign medals in their case, the Crimea medal with its clasps for Alma and Inkerman and Sebastopol. And there, under them, worn soft as a glove, was his paybook, the Buff Army paybook. Every soldier carried one. It followed a man his whole service, a plain little book bound in buff-coloured board, and in it the army wrote down what it owed him and what it paid him, campaign by campaign, quarter by quarter. I do not know why I opened it. Sentiment, I suppose. To see his hand. To hold a thing he had held. I turned it toward the candle, and I went through it slowly. From the front, the way you read a life. His enlistment. His first pay as an ensign, ridiculously small, his steps up, the years, the postings. And then the Crimea, and here the neat columns began to go strange. I am no soldier, but I had kept accounts for 30 years, and I know an unsettled column when I see one. The back pages of that book were full of entries that had never been closed. Field allowances, unpaid, batter, the Indian word they used for a campaign allowance, entered and never remitted. And month after month of ordinary pay, his colonel's pay, marked as due but never sent. There was a scrawled note in another hand, a paymaster's hand, dated at Balaclava, that spoke of the confusion in the harbour, the lost muster rolls, the accounts to be reconciled at the war's end, and after that note the entries simply stopped being paid. They went on being owed. They ran, by my counting there in the candlelight, to something over 18 months of allowances and pay that the army had marked down and never handed over. I remember I sat back in his chair. I remember the candle guttering and the house creaking around me. And I remember thinking, plainly, with no drama in it at all, they never paid him. They had never squared the account. The Crown owed my husband a great deal of money for the very campaign in which he had ruined us to keep other men alive, and it had simply never come. The paymaster's chaos at Balaclava had swallowed it, and Edmund, being Edmund, had never chased it. It embarrassed him to ask for money. It always had. They always square it, only they take an age about it. He had trusted that they would, one day, and one day had not come before his heart stopped over his boots. I looked at that column of figures for a long time. And then I did a thing that I am almost ashamed to tell you, because it shows how far even I was from seeing what I held. I closed the book. I said to myself, out loud, in the empty study, I never thought the army's slow sums could matter to a Shropshire mortgage. And I put the paybook back in the drawer, under the medals, and I went up to my cold bed, and I did not think of it again for 3 days. That is the truth. The vault was in my hand at midnight on the day of the funeral, and I set it down and walked away from it, because I could not yet imagine that a soldier's back pay, lost in a harbour on the Black Sea, could reach across Europe and save an English field. Hold that. It will matter. 3 days later Fenn came again. This time he did not trouble to come inside. It was a grey morning with a wind coming up the valley. I was in the still room with the maid when Cobb came to the door, and his face told me before his mouth did that something was wrong. "Ma'am," he said, "the agent's at the gate. He's brought a paper and a hammer." I went out. I walked down the drive between the limes, and the wind pulled at my black skirts, and there at the great gate of Hartsmere stood Josiah Fenn on the mounting step of his gig, with a printed bill in one hand and a carpenter's hammer in the other. And on the road beyond the gate, drawn up with their carts, were 2 village men, the Pardo brothers, who carried coal and timber up and down the valley. Witnesses. He had wanted witnesses. He did not get down. He nailed the notice to my own gate while I stood and watched. 3 blows of the hammer, loud in the morning. The paper was a foreclosure notice. It named the debt, and it named the company, and it said that Hartsmere Manor and its lands would be sold to satisfy the sum, by public auction, and it gave a date. 14 days. 14 days hence. Inside the very month of my husband's burial. I read it on the gate with the nails still bright in it, and Fenn watched me read it, and when I turned to him he smiled, and he said it again, in case the first time had not been enough. He said it slow, so the Pardo brothers on the road would be sure to hear. "Grief is not legal tender, Mrs. Merrick." I have thought since that he loved that phrase too well. He had made it up, I suppose, and been pleased with it, and now he could not stop saying it. A man who repeats his cruelty is a man who has begun to enjoy it. I said nothing. I had said nothing at the wake, and I said nothing at the gate. I looked at him on his mounting step with his hammer, this well-fed man come to nail a poor paper to a colonel's gate before 2 carters, and I let the silence sit on him until even he felt it, and shifted, and gathered up his reins. 14 days, he said, less smoothly now. "You'd do well to have your things in order, ma'am. Mr. Pike has expressed an interest in the land. A fair buyer. You'll not be turned out to the road. The company is not without feeling." Mr. Pike, Halloran Pike. There it was, the name of the buyer, dropped as if by accident. Pike was our neighbour, a speculator, a man who bought land the way other men buy dinner, for what he could get out of it, and no other reason. He had wanted the Hartsmere water-meadows for years. He had offered for them once, in Edmund's lifetime, and been refused, and gone away sour. Now here was his name in Fenn's mouth 3 days after the funeral, and I understood the whole shape of the thing. Fenn would force the sale, Pike would buy the meadows cheap. And I did not yet know it, but Fenn meant to have the manor itself, quietly, through Pike as his front for a fraction of its worth, and to be a landed gentleman on the back of a widow's ruin. I said, "Good morning, Mr. Fenn." That was all, and I turned and walked back up the drive, past Cobb, who stood by the gate with his one hand and his still face, and the look of a man holding himself very hard indeed, and I went into my house and I shut the door. Behind the door I stood a moment in the cold hall, and then I went to the study, and I opened the drawer, and I took out the buff paybook, and this time I did not put it down. The letter came next from the solicitor. Mr. Crail, he signed himself, of the company's London office. It was a courtier's letter, all regret and regulation, and it confirmed what the gate had said. The sale was fixed. 14 days. The lot to be sold as one, the manor and the home farm and the water meadows together, or in parcels at the auctioneer's discretion. And it added, in a line I read twice, that as the property might not fetch its worth in the time, the company reserved the right to bid, to protect its interest. To bid. The lender would bid at its own sale. That is a thing that should have made a fair man pause. It did not make Fenn pause. It was the whole plan. And Pike, that same week, was seen down in the water-meadows with a chain and a buoy, measuring my husband's fields with the grass not yet grown over his grave. Cobb told me of it. Grim, he walked the long meadow twice, ma'am, and stepped off the drainage on the low ground and told the boy to write it down. He was counting his profit before he owned a blade of it. I said nothing to that either. But I marked it. I was marking everything now. I had become, without meaning to, a keeper of accounts of a different sort. The 14th day was a market day in Ludcott, and that, I have always believed, was chosen too. They cried the auction at the market cross. I was not there. I heard it from the vicar, who came up to Hartsmere afterward with his hat in his hands and his face full of shame on the parish's behalf. There is a stone cross in the middle of Ludcott where the market has stood for 500 years, and on market day the whole valley comes in, the farmers and their wives, the drovers, the shop people, everyone, and there, at the busiest hour, the auctioneer's man stood up on the step of the cross and cried the sale of Hartsmere Manor. He read it out, the whole lot, the house and the land, to be sold in 10 days at the manor itself, by order of the Averill Mortgage Annuity Company. And when he was done at the cross, he walked across to the church, my church, where my husband's funeral was 10 days gone, and he posted the same bill on the church door. On the church door, where the black crape of the mourning was still pinned from Edmund's burial. They nailed the notice of our ruin next to the token of our grief, on the door of God's house, for the whole parish to read on its way in to pray. I do not think I have ever, before or since, felt a thing so cold as I felt when the vicar told me that. It was not enough for them to take the manor. They meant to take it publicly. They meant every soul in the valley to see the colonel's widow sold up. Humiliation was not a by-product of the plan. It was part of the plan. A widow shamed before her neighbours is a widow who will not fight. They did not know me. I sat that night, again at Edmund's desk, with the paybook open and the candle lit, and this time I did not walk away. I had been to Ludcott's little lending library, and I had read what I could of the law of the army's pay, and I had asked one quiet question of the vicar, who had a cousin in a lawyer's office in Shrewsbury, and a thing had begun to come clear to me. It was this. The money the Crown owed my husband did not die with him. It was a debt like any other, and a debt owed to a dead man passes to his estate, and his estate was mine. And more than that, and here my heart had begun, very slowly to beat harder, a claim upon withheld pay could be assigned. It could be put in the hands of the regiment's own army agents, the men in London who handled such things for the officers of the 41st, Messrs. Trant and Rowe of Craig's Court, and they could press it, and when the Crown at last paid, the payment could be drawn as a treasury order, a draft, real money, made out to redeem exactly such a debt as the one nailed to my gate. I sat very still when I understood it fully. Because I did the sum. I had done the sum a dozen times, but now I did it, knowing what it meant. The lender claimed £3,850. The army, by the columns in that worn buff book, owed my husband more than the whole debt. The very campaign that had cost us the meadows had also, in its confusion, left the Crown standing in my husband's debt to a greater sum than the lender was trying to seize the meadows over. The thing that could save Hartsmere had been sleeping in a drawer under his medals since the day he died. I wrote 3 letters that night, one to Messrs. Trant and Rowe, the regiment's agents, laying the paybook's back pages before them, entry by entry, in my own careful hand, and asking them plainly what a soldier's widow must do to recover what the Crown owed her husband, and whether that recovery could be assigned to lift a mortgage. One to the office of the Paymaster-General, formal and cold, stating the sums and the dates, and the paymaster's own note from Balaclava. And one, The shortest I did not send at once. I set it aside. It was to Fenn. I would send it when the moment was right, and it would be witnessed, and it would matter more than either of the others. But that is a little ahead of the story. The answer from Trant and Rowe was a long time coming, longer than the days I had, and that was the whole cruelty of the timing, do you see? The army was slow. The army was always slow. They always square it, only they take an age about it. Edmund had said it as a jest, and now it was the knife at my throat, because the debt that could save me sat in London behind a wall of clerks, and the sale that would ruin me was cried at the church door with a date on it, and the two were racing, and the wrong one was ahead. 10 days. The auction was fixed for 10 days hence, on the lawn of my own house. Fenn had chosen the Manor lawn on purpose, I am sure of it, so that I might watch it from my own windows. Pike was measuring. Crail was drawing his clean papers. The bill was on the church door. And somewhere in a counting house in Craig's Court, a clerk had not yet opened my letter. I did one more thing before I let the silence fall. I took up that third letter, the one I had set aside, and I finished it, and I sent for the vicar to witness it. It was to Fenn, and it was formal, and it was very short. In it I requested, as was my right, that the company stay the sale for 14 days, pending a Crown claim upon my late husband's arrears of pay, a claim which, I set down plainly, exceeded the sum the company demanded. I asked only for time. 14 days. Nothing more. And I had the vicar sign beneath my name as witness to the sending, and I kept a fair copy, in my own hand, of every word, because I knew, even then, what a written thing is worth. I knew that if they refused me in writing, having been warned in writing, then whatever came after would be theirs to answer for, and not mine. I did not yet know how it would come. I did not know if the letter from London would arrive in time, or at all. I only knew that I would set the trap fair and square, in ink, before witnesses, and let them walk into it with their eyes open. I sent the letter to Fenn on a Tuesday, by Cobb's own hand, and Cobb stood in the company office at Ludcott until a clerk had taken it and marked it received. And then there was nothing to do but wait, and watch the days come down like the sexton's earth, one after another, toward the morning they meant to sell my house on its own grass. I did not tell a soul what was in the London letters, not the vicar, not the maid, not even Cobb, though Cobb knew there was something, for he had carried the letter and seen the direction on it, Craig's Court, and he was an old soldier, and he knew what an army agent was. He said nothing, but once, passing me on the stair, he touched his cap and said, "Lo, the regiment don't forget its own, ma'am, whatever else." And I thought, that is true, but the regiment is not the same thing as the Crown, and the Crown is slow, and the days are short. 10 days, then 9, then 8. The bill yellowed on the church door, and no one dared take it down. Pike's boy came again to the meadows. Fenn's gig went up and down the Ludcott road, and once I saw it, stopped by my gate, and saw him look up the drive at the house he meant to have, with the smile of a man who has already won, and is only waiting for the formality of it. And I sat in the evenings at Edmund's desk, with the buff paybook open before me, and I ran my finger down the columns the army had never closed, and I waited for a letter to come from London, and I did not know if it would come in time. And I told no one that the whole of Hartsmere now hung on 18 months of a dead colonel's forgotten pay, lost in the mud of Balaclava, 3 years and 1,000 miles away. Fenn's answer to my warning came on the 7th day before the sale. It was in Crail's hand, the solicitor's, and it was one line, and I have it yet. The company does not wait upon the War Office's bookkeeping. That was all. That was the refusal. I had asked, in writing, before a witness, for 14 days, and I had told them why, and they had put their contempt down in ink and signed it and sent it back. The company does not wait upon the War Office's bookkeeping. They thought it a fine dismissal. They did not know they had just handed me the second half of the thing I needed. The first half was in the drawer. The second half was in that sentence. Because a company that has been warned and refuses in writing and forecloses anyway has stepped off the safe ground without knowing it, and all that remains is for the ground to give way beneath them. I folded Crayle's letter, and I put it with my copy of my own, the warning and the refusal together, the pair of them, and I locked the drawer. 7 days. The paybook in the dark. The letter to Tranton Row somewhere in London unanswered, Pike measuring. Fenn smiling. The bill on the church door. And a widow at her desk in a cold house, saying nothing, counting everything, waiting for a coach that might not come. I did not tell Cobb where I was going. I told him only to watch the house. The night mail left the Ludcott crossroads at 10:15. I stood in the dark with a carpet bag and the buff paybook wrapped in oilcloth against my breast, under my cloak, over my heart, the way a woman carries a thing she will not lose. The guard handed me up. The lamps swung. And I rode all night toward London with my husband's unpaid pay held to my chest like a living child. I did not sleep. I watched the hedges go by black against a paler black. I thought of Edmund. I thought of the men he had clothed out of his own mortgaged acres, because the army was slow, always slow, slow to send boots, and slow to send powder, and slow, slowest of all, to pay. He had never complained of it. He had said the sums would come right in the end. He had died believing the Crown an honest debtor. I meant to make his belief true, or die trying, before a stranger's hammer came down on his roof. We reached the city in a grey, wet dawn. I found a room, and I washed the road from my face, and at 10 o'clock I stood at the counter of Messrs. Tranton Row, Army agents, at Craig's Court, Charing Cross. The clerk who came to me was young, too young to have known the Crimea except as headlines. He asked my business in the flat-bored voice of a man who has heard every business. I laid the paybook on the counter, and I opened it to the back pages. My husband was Colonel Edmund Merrick, I said, the 41st Shropshire Fusiliers. He is 3 months dead. The army owes his estate 18 months of campaign pay and allowances, unremitted since the confusion at Balaclava. I have come to claim it. The boy's face changed. Not much. But it changed. He turned the book toward himself and he ran his eye down the columns, and I watched the boredom go out of him line by line. "Wait here, madam," he said. And he took the book. I nearly snatched it back, God forgive me. I nearly clawed it out of his hands, and he carried it through a door in the panelling. I waited an hour. It was the longest hour I had yet spent, longer than the wake, longer than the graveside, longer than any night at Edmund's desk. Men came and went. A clock ticked. I stood, because I did not trust myself to sit and then rise steady. When the door opened again, it was not the boy. It was an older man, grey, spectacled, with ink on his cuff and a careful manner. He introduced himself as one of the partners. He held the paybook as one holds something of worth. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, "these entries are genuine. We hold the counterfoils." The regiment's accounts were thrown into disorder after the harbour was wrecked, and a great many officers' arrears went unsettled, and a great many were never claimed, because a great many of those officers did not come home. He looked at me over the spectacles. "Your husband is owed a considerable sum. More, I should think, than you have come expecting." "I have come expecting £3,850, I said. "That is what will save my house." He almost smiled. "Then, you have come expecting too little." He explained it to me then, slowly as to a woman, and I let him, because I needed the law of the thing exact, and I would rather be condescended to than mistaken. A dead soldier's withheld pay passed to his estate. The estate's representative, I, his widow and executrix, might lodge the claim, and might assign its proceeds where she pleased. A treasury order could be drawn against it. It would take days to authorize. It could not be done in an hour. How many days? I said. That I cannot promise. The sale is in 6 days, I said, at my own gate, on my own lawn. If the order does not come before the hammer, it does not matter how much the Crown owes a dead man. Do you understand me, sir? Late will be the same as never. He was quiet a moment. Then he did a thing I had not looked for. He took off his spectacles, and he said, I served with the commissariat in the East, madam. I saw what your husband's regiment went into, and what it came out as. I will put this claim before the paymaster myself, today, by hand, and I will tell him whose widow waits on it. I can promise you the effort. I cannot promise you the day. I signed the papers at his counter. I assigned the whole proceeds of my husband's arrears to the redemption of the mortgage held by the Averill Mortgage Annuity Company upon Hartsmere Manor. I signed my name, Adelaide Merrick, in a hand that did not shake, though everything under the hand was shaking, and I left the paybook with them, which was like leaving a limb, and I took the receipt they gave me instead, a scrap of paper worth a manor, and I put it where the book had been, against my heart. Then I took the coach home to wait. That was all that was left. To go home and say nothing, and wait, and let a smiling man believe he had won. I did the hardest thing I have ever done in the 6 days that followed. I did nothing that showed. I let Fenn think me beaten. When his clerk rode past the gate, I did not come out. When Pike walked my water-meadows with his measuring chain, counting my husband's acres into his own future, I watched from the window, and I did not send Cobb to drive him off, though Cobb stood at my shoulder with his one hand closed hard enough to whiten. Let him measure, I said. Let him plan the barn he'll build. A man plans hardest for the thing that's already sliding out from under him. Cobb looked at me. He was the only soul at Hartsmere who knew I had been to London, for he had seen me go and seen me come, and he had asked no question, being a soldier, and knowing that some orders are given by silence. You've done a thing, ma'am, he said. I don't know what, but you've done a thing. I've posted a letter, Cobb, I said. That's all a widow can do. Post a letter and wait to see if the world still answers letters. But it ate at me. Every hour of it ate at me. Word came on the 4th day, carried down by a carrier from the coach office, a single line from Tranton Row. Hurried, kind, the claim is allowed. The order is authorized. It has not yet issued. I read it standing in the yard, and I had to put my hand on the mounting block. Authorized, but not issued. A door unlocked, but not opened. The money was mine in the eye of the law, and not yet mine in any purse that could stop a hammer. 2 days remained. The next day near broke me. A rumour ran up from the village, brought by the baker's boy, that the sale had been put off, that Fenn had cried off, that London had spoken, that Hartsmere was saved. Cobb came running with it, and his weathered face was cracked open with a joy I had not seen on it since before the Colonel sailed. And for the space of one breath I let myself believe it, and the relief went through me like warm water. Then I made myself think, and I sent the boy back down to read the church door with his own eyes. He came back slower. The bill still hung there, the sale still stood. Tuesday, the appointed morning, 11 of the clock, on the lawn before the manor. The rumour had been nothing, a hope let loose in a village that loved us, dressed up as a fact. Fenn had cried off nothing. Pike still measured. The hammer was still coming. I did not weep at that either. I had wept myself dry weeks before. But I sat that night at Edmund's desk with the drawer open, looking at the 2 folded letters that lay where the paybook used to lie, my warning, and Crail's 1-line refusal, the pair of them married in the dark. The company does not wait upon the War Office's bookkeeping. I read it again by the candle, and I thought, no, you did not wait. You were warned, and you would not wait, and now whatever falls on you, You carried up the ladder yourself. The vicar came to me that evening. He had witnessed my letter, he knew what I had asked and what they had refused. He sat with me a while, and he did not offer me comfort of the useless kind. He said only, "Whatever comes on Tuesday, Mrs. Merrick, you did it by the book. Before God and before a witness, you asked them fair. Let that be a stone under your foot, whatever the day brings." "It will bring a coach or it will bring a hammer," I said. "One of the two will come down that lane by 11 o'clock. I have done all a woman can to make it the coach. The rest is not in my hands." He stayed till the candle guttered. Then he went, and I sat alone, and I listened to the old house breathe around me, 30 years of Merricks in its timbers, and I waited for Tuesday the way you wait for a tide you cannot turn. Tuesday came bright and hard and blue, a cruel, clear morning, the kind that shows every stone. They set the auctioneer's table on my own lawn, under the limes, where Edmund had used to take his tea. By 10 o'clock the parish had begun to come. They came shamefaced, most of them hats in their hands, the way people come to a hanging they cannot approve of and cannot stay away from. Farmers, cottagers, the Pardo brothers, coal and timber men standing by the gate. Mr. Harkness, who had been at the wake. The baker's boy. Faces I had known 30 years, come to watch a soldier's widow put out of her house on the credit of a debt her husband took on to clothe his men. Fenn came at 10:30, mounted, easy, in a good coat. He had brought Crail, the solicitor, thin and dry in black. And he had brought his front, though he thought no one saw it for a front. Halloran Pike stood a little apart with his hands in his pockets and his chin up, the golden buyer, ready to bid, and every soul on that lawn believed Pike wanted the manor for Pike. Only I knew Fenn meant to nod him higher and higher and buy Hartsmere for Fenn, cheap, through another man's mouth. Self-dealing, they call it now, a company's own agent, bidding against no one for his company's own forfeit, and pocketing the difference. He had arranged it as neat as a card trick. Fenn saw me at my own door, and he lifted his hat to me. He lifted his hat. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, "a hard morning, but the law is the law, and grief, as I think I said, is not legal tender." He put the hat back on. "I did warn you not to build your hopes on the War Office. Slow sums, madam, slow sums never yet stopped a fast hammer." "So you did, Miss Fenn," I said. "You put it in writing." "I have the writing still." Something crossed his face, not fear, he had no fear in him, but a small puzzlement, a man hearing a note slightly off the key. Then he shrugged it away and rode to the table, and the auctioneer stood, and the crowd went quiet, and the clock over the stable arch said 11:15. I stood on my own step, and I looked down the lane. It was empty, green and empty in the morning light, the ruts baked hard, no dust, no coach, nothing moving on it but a magpie that hopped and flew. I had staked everything, the house, Edmund's name, my own good sense, on a treasury order authorized and not issued, on a partner's promise of effort and not of the day, on a scrap of paper against my heart where the paybook used to be. And the lane was empty, and the hammer was in the auctioneer's hand. The auctioneer began. He described the property in the flat sing-song of his trade, the manor house of Hartsmere, the gardens, the home farm, the water-meadows, and here Pike shifted his feet, comprising acres of the first quality, a capital residence. He asked for an opening bid. Pike said a figure, a low figure, an insulting figure, a fraction of what my house was worth, and Fenn nodded, small, to the auctioneer, encouraging the hammer went up. I have lived a long life since that morning, and I have never again felt a second stretch so long as that one. The hammer up. The lane empty. The parish silent. My whole world balanced on the head of a pin, and the pin belonging to a smiling stranger. And then Cobb at the gate, turned his head. He heard it before any of us. A one-armed man hears with his whole body. He turned, and he called out, one cracked shout across the lawn, "A coach!" There's a coach on the Ludcott road. And every head turned with his, and the auctioneer's hammer stopped in the air. It came fast. A post-chaise, 2 horses, driven hard, the postboy standing to his work, and the wheels throwing up the dust the empty lane had promised. It came down my lane, and it swung in at my scarred gate, past the Pardo brothers, onto my lawn, and it pulled up steaming a dozen yards from the auctioneer's table, and a man got down from it before it had fully stopped. He was a stranger to the parish, but not to me, for I knew the cut of him, the same careful grey partner from the counter at Craig's Court, come the whole way himself, with a leather case under his arm. "I am here on the business of the estate of Colonel Edmund Merrick," he said, loud, to the whole lawn, in a clerk's carrying voice. "I am an agent of Messrs. Trant and Rowe, the regiment's army agents. Am I in time? Has the property been sold?" "The property is under the hammer, sir," said the auctioneer, "and you interrupt a lawful sale." "There is no lawful sale," the grey man said, "for there is no debt to sell it for." And he opened his case on the auctioneer's own table, and he laid a paper on it, and I came down from my step then, at last down the lawn through the parted crowd, and I stood beside him, and I looked at what he had brought 150 miles through the night to lay down. It was a treasury draft, drawn on the account of the Paymaster-General, in settlement of the arrears of pay and campaign allowances due to the late Colonel Edmund Merrick of the 41st Foot, for £4,720. 4,720. The debt against my house was 3,850. I had come home from London hoping the Crown owed enough to cover it. The Crown owed enough to cover it, and more. £870 more. My husband's forgotten pay, mouldering 18 months in a wrecked paymaster's chest at Balaclava, was larger than the whole mortgage that a smiling man had ridden out to seize. "This draft," said the grey agent, "is assigned by the executrix, Mrs. Adelaide Merrick, to the redemption in full of the mortgage held by the Averill Mortgage Annuity Company upon this estate. It redeems the debt entire. The debt being redeemed, the power of sale falls. There is nothing here to auction, sir, there never was, since the moment this claim was allowed. You may put down your hammer." The silence on the lawn broke like a wave. I heard the parish let out its breath all together, a great sound, half a sob and half a cheer, and the Pardo brothers roared, and someone's hat went up, and Cobb at the gate stood with his one arm across his eyes. But I did not look at the crowd. I looked at Fenn. He had gone the colour of tallow. He came off his horse and to the table, and he snatched at the draft. The agent moved it smoothly out from under his hand, and he read it upside down and then right way up, and I watched the sum go into him, and I watched him understand it. Not beaten. Ruined. There is a difference, and it showed on his face as it dawned. This cannot be presented today," he said. "This is a paper." "A draft. It must be. There are forms. It is a treasury order, Mr. Fenn, drawn and signed," said the grey agent, "and it is legal tender, which I believe is a phrase you are fond of. Your company's own solicitor will confirm it to you." "Mr. Crail?" And Crail, the thin, dry solicitor, came and looked at the draft over Fenn's shoulder, and Crail, to his one small credit, did not lie about it. He read it, and his jaw worked, and he said, "Lo, it is good, Fenn. It is a Crown draft. It is good." Then I spoke. Once I had planned no speech. I had only one thing to say, and I had carried it a long way to say it, and I said it into the quiet dry to Fenn before the whole parish that had come to see me shamed. "The Crown pays its soldiers late, Mr. Fenn," I said, "but it pays them. You will find you cannot say the same." He had no answer. There was no answer to have. He stood with the draft in front of him, and £870 of a dead man's honesty crushing his neat little swindle flat, and he had no answer, and the parish saw he had no answer. And that was worse for him than any curse I could have laid. I thought that was the whole of it. It was not. There was a second thing coming down the Ludcott road, and it was louder than the first. Horses, a body of horses, ridden together, and the ring of them came up the lane before they did, and then they came in at the gate, 6, 8 men, mounted, grey-haired, most of them, upright all of them, in the plain good coats of gentlemen who had once worn red, and at their head an old man straight as a ramrod, with a face like a cliff. General Sir Aubrey Standish, Edmund's own commander from the east. And behind him rode the brother officers of the 41st, the men my husband had bled beside at the Alma and the Inkerman Heights. Come, God knows how the word had reached them, but a regiment's word travels, come to stand on their dead colonel's lawn. The general did not dismount at first. He sat his horse, and he looked over the scene. The table, the draught, the tallow-faced agent, the crowd, and last of all me. And he took off his hat to me, and held it against his chest, bare-headed, in the sun, an old soldier to a soldier's widow. And every officer behind him did the same. 8 grey heads bared on my lawn. I have the picture of it yet behind my eyes, and I will have it when I die. Then he got down, stiff, and a younger man got down with him, his own solicitor, it proved, for a general who rides to a rescue rides prepared, and the general said, "Mrs. Merrick." Edmund Merrick pulled me off the field at Inkerman with a ball in my hip, and I have owed him a debt these 3 years, and I am ashamed it took the news of this market-day cruelty, to bring me to pay it. But I am here now, and I am not come only to bare my head. He turned his cliff of a face on Fenn. "My man has been reading your company's charter, sir. Show them, Clausen." The general's solicitor stepped to the table, and he had papers of his own, and he spoke to Crail, professional to professional, cold as well water. "You are Mr. Crail, the Averill Company's solicitor? You drew this foreclosure and set this sale?" "I did," said Crail. "Then you drew it inside the mourning term your own company's charter forbids." Clausen laid a printed page on the table beside the Treasury draft. The Averill Mortgage and Annuity Company's Charter of Incorporation, Clause the 11th. No forfeiture nor sale of a deceased mortgagor's dwelling shall be commenced within the period of 1 month from the burial. Colonel Merrick was buried on the 9th. Your notice was nailed to that gate, he pointed, and every eye went to the raw split in my gatepost where the nail had gone in 11 days after. Your sale was cried inside the month. Your bill was posted on the church door inside the month. The whole proceeding is void on its face, Mr. Crail, void from the first nail, and every act done under it a trespass. That notice on the lady's gate was not law. It was a trespass upon her freehold, done in her month of mourning, in the teeth of your own charter. Crail said nothing. He looked at the printed clause. He had drawn the foreclosure himself. His own signature was on the void notice. The evidence against him was in his own hand. He was a man who had wanted the paperwork clean above all things, and he had foreclosed inside a term the statute forbade, and now his cleanness was the rope. He sat down on the auctioneer's chair, very suddenly, as a man sits when his knees have stopped consulting him. But Fenn tried to bluster even then. That was the arrogance of him, his one blind spot. That he could not believe the ground had truly gone. "A technicality," he said loud to the crowd, waving a hand. "A lawyer's quibble. The debt was owed. The company was within its." "The company," said Clausen, mild, "will answer for an unlawful sale, for a trespass, and for the distress caused to a widow inside her mourning." "That is not a quibble, sir. That is a suit. And there is one thing more." He drew out a last letter, and he held it up. "Word travels, Mr. Fenn, and it travelled to your own directors faster than you rode here this morning. When it was put to them that their West County agent had arranged to purchase a forfeit estate for himself, through a nominee bidder at a sale he himself was crying, they sent me this, to be read where you stood. He unfolded it. "You are dismissed, sir, dismissed for self-dealing, from this hour. They will not have their house's name on what you did here today." And he read it out. On my lawn, before the parish. The director's own letter turning their agent off, read aloud in the sun, while Fenn stood by the table he had thought to profit at. I almost pitied him. Almost then I remembered the clerk at the lych-gate, and the note edged in black pressed on me over my husband's open grave, and I found I did not pity him at all. I looked for Pike then, the golden buyer, the neighbour who had measured my meadows with a chain while my husband was 3 weeks in the ground. He was already going. He had understood, quicker than Fenn, that there was nothing here for him, that no title would pass, that the acres he had counted stayed Merrick acres, that his cheap prize had turned to air in his open hand. He was walking back down the lawn toward the gate, stiff, not looking at anyone, his measuring man trailing after him, with the chain still over his shoulder. And the parish, God bless the common cruelty and the common justice of country people, the parish laughed at him. Not a roar, a ripple. A low ripple of country laughter, following him down the lawn and out the gate. The Pardo brothers loudest of all, and Pike went out of my sight into the lane with the laughter on his back and not one rood of my water-meadow to his name. He had come to carry off my land. He carried off a story the district would tell against him for 20 years, and that was all he carried. They cleared my lawn by noon. The auctioneer folded his table and went, ashamed, refusing his fee. Crowley rode away a broken man beside a dismissed one, and I do not know what passed between those two on that road, and I have never wished to. The parish came up to me one by one, the men that had stood there thinking to watch me fall, and they touched their hats, and they said their rough kind words, and I stood at my own door and took them, and behind me on the drawing-room wall. Through the open door, Edmund's sword hung on its 2 pegs, where it had hung all through the wake, all through the worst of it, and I thought, "You clothed your men, my dear, and it was the clothing of them, the debt you took on for them, that all but lost us the roof, and it was the pay they owed you for the clothing of them that bought the roof back." It came round in the end, the way you always said the army's slow sums would. The general stayed to dinner, and his officers with him. 8 of the 40 first at my table, that had thought to be a stranger's table by nightfall. Cobb waited on us, one armed and upright and prouder than I ever saw him, and would not be told to sit, though the general himself invited it. We dined under the sword, we drank to Edmund, and when they rode away in the dark the old general took my hand at the door, and he said, "The debt at Inkerman is not paid. Mrs. Merrick, a morning's ride does not pay it. But it is begun. You will find the 40 first does not forget its own, nor its own's widow." And they went off down the lane at a walk, the ring of them fading, and I stood at the door a long time after I could no longer hear them. There is a small last thing, and I keep it for the pleasure of it, for I am an old woman now, and entitled to my one dry pleasure. Some weeks after, 6 weeks, near enough, a letter came to Hartsmere, in a hand I did not know, from the Averill Mortgage and Annuity Company, London office. A new hand, Crayles was gone from their books. It was a smooth letter, a soft letter. It observed that a portion of mortgage remained upon the water-meadow acres, the honest remainder, the old honourable debt Edmund had truly taken on, and it wondered whether Mrs. Merrick might wish to renew that mortgage, on terms most advantageous, with the company that had the honour to have long served the family. Long served the family. They had nailed a notice to my gate inside my mourning month and cried my house at the Market Cross. Now they wrote, smooth as cream, asking my custom. They had come back to ask. I answered it myself. I did not need the vicar to witness this one. I wrote that I would consider renewing the honourable remainder of the debt with their company on one condition prior to all others, that they refund, first, and in full, the interest by which their late agent had overcharged the estate these several years. I had the figures, I had always had the figures, I keep the household book. Refund that, I wrote, and we will talk of terms. Until then I remain, their obedient servant, Adelaide Merrick. They refunded it. Of course they refunded it. A company that has narrowly escaped a suit for an unlawful sale does not haggle with the widow who could still bring it. The cheque came inside the fortnight. I put it to the Meadows, and the Meadows are Merrick Meadows yet. And the interest my husband was overcharged bought the first new plough Hartsmere had seen in 10 years. That was 30 years ago and more. I am telling you this from the far side of it, at peace, in the same house. It is a June evening as I set it down. The honey light comes late and long through the screen of limes my husband's grandfather planted, and lies gold on the floor of the room where the sword still hangs. The buff paybook is closed now. In the drawer, with Edmund's Crimea medal beside it, the clasps for the Alma and the Inkerman and Sebastopol catching the light when I open the drawer, which I do, sometimes of an evening, just to look. The treasury draft is long spent and long forgotten. It was never the point. The paybook was the point. The paybook and the 2 folded letters beside it, my warning and their refusal, married in the dark, that I keep to this day, because a woman ought to keep the proof that she asked fair before the world made the world pay. Sergeant Cobb is out at the gate this evening as I write, mending with his one hand the same gatepost the notice once split, planing the raw place smooth 30 years on, the way he has mended 100 things about this place, slow and sure and asking nothing. The officers of the 41st still dine here twice a year, fewer of them each year, grey going to white, and they drink to Edmund under his own sword, and the old general is these 5 years in the churchyard beside my husband, his income and debt paid. He told me at the last, paid in full. They forgot he was owed. That is the whole of it, when you boil the 30 years down to a spoonful. A great company, and a smiling agent, and a smooth solicitor, and a greedy neighbour, and every one of them forgot that a soldier who dies is still owed his pay, and that a soldier's widow, sitting quiet at her ledger while they nail their notices to her gate, is reading every column they are too proud to read. They took my husband for a closed account. They took me for a woman who would weep and sign. Quiet people read the fine print. Remember that. It is the only lesson I have to leave, and I have paid dear enough for it to be sure of it. What is taken unjustly is never truly kept. It was true on my lawn that Tuesday, and it is true tonight, and it will be true, I think, long after this old voice is done. The limes will go on throwing their gold across the floor, and the sword will hang, and the account, at the last, comes right. Soldiers' widows do not forget. And if you are watching this from your own town, wherever you are, with your own quiet ledger and your own fine print, comment your city below. I should dearly like to see how far a widow's story travels.